Welcome everyone to today's presentation on the approaches to privacy and security for IoT devices in a GDPR world. My name is Annabelle and I'll be your moderator today. Today's webinar will be presented by Sally Gannett and Udo Scala. Sally earned her BS in Management Information Systems from Bentley University. She holds a CISSP and CISA industry certifications and is a member of the IAPP. Her career has taken her from running an application development firm to leading security and privacy teams. She was a regional practice lead and practice manager for information security and risk management at OpenSky for 4 years before moving into her role as NAM business lead for privacy and data protection. She specializes in applying GDPR and other privacy regulations to current business environments and has an interest and focus on IoT. Udo brings a wealth of experience for management positions in large and medium enterprises. He held several senior positions at the German telecom AG and T-Systems. As a member of the board of Technisat, he was responsible for R&D, strategy, and sales. For today's presentation, each of you is in listen-only mode. We encourage you all to submit questions via the chat box. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation if time permits. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to Sally. Sally, please go ahead.
Thanks, Annabelle, and thank you to everyone for joining. It looks like we have a great turnout today with representation from many IoT companies and others as well. I'm really pleased to have Udo Scala presenting with me today. Udo is a worldwide traveler. He travels the world to meet Internet of Things manufacturers and service operators, discussing their challenges with GDPR compliance. So he will be providing some great examples on his experience throughout the presentation. Our presentation starts with the IoT market and an overview of key GDPR concepts. We'll then present some recent information regarding the state of GDPR compliance in the United States. Since this talk is about approaches to privacy and security around IoT in the GDPR world, we will then discuss topics in the context of common IT activities, such as design and risk management. We'll provide recommendations specific to IoT that you can incorporate into your GDPR preparations, and we'll close with some time for questions.
Thank you, Sally. So my name is Udo Scala, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the development of IoT. And here you see some pictures, and the most important thing is, which we have to distinguish from PC, smartphones, is that now things are communicating with the internet. So not the person is steering the information, things are doing this. And this has a great impact. And also it is very important when we sell products that we have to make sure that people understand what they are buying. I give you an example on a smoke detector. Until now, you buy a smoke detector and you think this is just a smoke detector. This helps me when my house is burning and it gives me an alarm. But what about the new smoke detectors with infrared cameras and with motion sensors? So people do not even know that there's a motion sensor in it. Or when you buy a doll, there was in Germany the doll Kalia. And if you Google this, Kalia is now forbidden to sell in Germany because there wasn't a microphone and there was a camera installed, and totally unsecure information were given to the internet. So this doll cannot be sold anymore. Or just take a smart TV. Maybe you have seen that there is a camera in it, but the new versions will have the camera built in the screen itself, so you do not even see the camera. And when you connect then a smart TV with a voice recognition software, with a face recognition software, when you put then also motion sensors into it, then you can just imagine which private information can be collected by smart TVs. So a smart TV is no longer just something where you can watch TV. Also the other way around, the smart TV is watching you. If you go to a medical market, for example, the insulin pump, which you see here on the right side, I think it is obvious when we combine an insulin pump with an insert to the body that there's very sensitive information and very private information. Or just take on the left side the lighting. So people see that they can dim a lamp, that they can switch it on and off, maybe they have different colors. But do people understand that there is 1 megabyte data given to the manufacturer day by day? So the light tells which color I'm on, when was I switched on and off. And this maybe seems to you not as a problem, but the lamp knows in which room it is. The room knows who is living in the room. And now we combine that all together, and this makes a perfect picture of your personal behavior. So when we talk about the GDPR, we have to always to see that we are talking about personal behavior. So privacy is always about personal behavior. We should not change data, and we should protect the data. So this is a very important thing, and we only talk about personal behavior. And persons can be consumers, and it can be employees. I'll give you different examples. In the States, we expect that more than 500 devices in a household will be connected in the year 2022. So just imagine 500 devices are collecting data about your personal behavior. Then it is very clear when you combine this with the information which is already given on the internet, then this can be a very clear picture about your person. Employees, I just want to take the actual wristband from Amazon. Amazon has developed and has even patents on it, a wristband for employees with motion sensors. So they control every step the employees are doing in their warehouse. They can even see if you pull your hand to the right side or to the left side. So any movement is controlled. And by the end, this is not in line with the general data protection regulation.
This slide shows a guide to key GDPR concepts. I want to mention here that a great source for information around GDPR and other privacy topics would be the National Association of Privacy Professionals, or the IAPP, at iapp.org. I know that helps a lot of folks in understanding what's out there, because there are so many different regulations for different countries, for different industries even. So this slide gives us an overview on GDPR. You can't have privacy without security. So therefore, GDPR includes both privacy and security. A lot of folks think that it's privacy alone, but that's not the case at all. GDPR is enforceable starting actually in 2 days. So May 25th is the first day that the governing body can actually impose fines and penalties. Later in the presentation, we'll offer suggestions on what to do if you haven't started compliance work yet. Essentially, if you haven't started, the GDPR is going away in the near future. So it's important to get started now in any way possible. We have some examples of that in a few slides. But the potential fines are huge. So for non-compliance, fines can reach up to 20 million euros, or 4% of your annual turnover. It's huge for many companies, and it could actually put your company out of business. So very significant, really important to pay attention to GDPR. Additionally, the cost to your reputation could be severe. So imagine if the world finds out that there is a data breach, and the data breach involves personal data, that's GDPR, and not good. So that could also put you out of business. You definitely don't want the public to learn that their personal data has been mishandled and it's gotten out into the wide world. In the U.S., up to this point, most privacy law in the U.S. has been focused on businesses, and an example of that is HIPAA. So HIPAA is organization-centric. It focuses on covered entities and business associates in the U.S. and protecting them. But GDPR is different. It focuses on individuals, the individual's rights and freedoms. Individuals are in the driver's seat, so they can complain to the governing body if they feel their rights or freedoms are being threatened. And of course, if you give people the method to complain, they're definitely going to complain. So another reason to stay on top of the GDPR. So let's review some points on this slide. These are key topics in GDPR. It is not an exhaustive GDPR guide. There's much more to GDPR, many more details involved, and a lot of legalities. International relevance. So the GDPR applies to all companies selling products and services or marketing to the EU. This includes companies large and small. So just because you're a small company doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to comply with GDPR. Data processing. For the most part, the GDPR allows data to be processed only if you obtain consent from the individuals or there's a need, a legal need or contractual reason for you to process the data. So there's a lot around consent. I know Udo's going to talk a little bit later about consent. It's a very, very important piece, especially in the IoT environment. Obligations to provide information. GDPR requires that you make individuals' data available to them whenever they request it. So it's important to have a clear, concise, non-technical way for people to access their data. There's also data portability. So data needs to be able to move in and out of your systems. So if you have somebody's data and they decide that they're going to switch, they're going to either get rid of your product or service or switch to a competitor maybe. You need to provide a way to get their information, their data, out and into the other system that they're moving to. So that's data portability. Data erasure or duty to erase. That says that an individual, if you hold an individual's data, they must be able to ask for it to be erased, and it needs to be erased in a timely manner. So if I ask you to get rid of all of my data, you need to go into all of the locations where it sits and get rid of it. Now this also includes third parties. So anywhere, if you've taken my data and given it to somebody else, you need a mechanism to then tell the third party that this person wants their data removed, and hopefully they will be able to remove it. You want to ensure as much as possible that they have processes in place to allow for that. Security of processing is a big area, and this is where obviously security comes into play. So this involves the technical security measures around securing the personal data. So companies have personal data. It's only going to be private if you can keep it secure, keep it within the boundaries of what you are legally allowed to do with it and what consent you have received, and not get it out into the wide world. So technologies like encryption are involved in securing security of processing. Privacy by design and default. This involves making sure that during the product and service design process, the privacy is considered. It also has to be considered during all the iterations of design. So, we have done quite a bit of work with manufacturers where it takes, years to get a product to market. And during that time, there's obviously a lot of changes to the design process. So GDPR is saying that during that design, during those years, and even after it is out the door, you need to make sure that privacy is considered. And you are upholding the legal laws around what you have decided you're going to hold private and what people have consented to. Also, privacy by default. includes concepts like data minimization during design. That means that you should only hold data that you really need to perform the service. Don't hold any extra data, because that's, first of all, it's a violation. You want to make sure that you can get to the data whenever somebody needs it erased, for instance, is a perfect example, that you know where it is and that you can go in and erase it. Don't make copies of data. Don't move it around. Lastly, the GDPR has opened the door for certification companies to provide for future sanctioned GDPR certifications. So how are U.S. companies doing in preparing for GDPR? Well, not so good. So here we see information from a recent survey of 400 people with responsibility for data at small, medium, and large firms. Clearly, there remains confusion on the GDPR. If we look at the top left, only approximately 50% of small firms, 60% of medium, and 70% of large firms say they're familiar with GDPR. The majority being only somewhat familiar. That's concerning. We're all working to change that. As you can see on the right, as of the survey, which was done actually in April, 20% of large firms and 27% of small firms are only somewhat compliant or still reviewing compliance options, so they haven't even started. And 26% and 14% are unsure of their compliance status. This is a month before enforcement begins, so again, very concerning. However, if we look at the bottom, 64%, there is some encouragement in this survey. So 64% of all companies surveyed agree that GDPR provides some level of benefit to them in going through the process of being compliant. So mistakes, don't make these mistakes. So GDPR is complex. It isn't a U.S. law. However, if you sell to, market to, or use the data of individuals in the EU, you have to comply with it. No matter where your company resides, no matter what the data is stored, no matter where the data is stored or processed, no matter what size of company you are. You could be a small mom and pop shop or a large organization. It still applies. Don't make the mistake of thinking it doesn't apply to you. We recommend that you seek legal guidance to make sure that it either does or does not apply to you. Secondly, don't underestimate the time and cost to be compliant. There are many moving parts. Many business streams and functions are involved. Documentation and process work takes time. There's quite a bit of documentation involved in GDPR and compliance. Technical changes, those can be expensive. So recommend that you make a plan to start if you haven't, and treat it like a significant corporate objective. So write project plans, document all the actions that you're taking, follow up, and make sure that you can prove that you're at least working towards GDPR compliance. Lastly, be aware that there's some misinformation on the internet, due in part to GDPR has been evolving over time. So there are some old documents out there that might not be exactly truthful anymore because the law has changed. So one myth is that the GDPR only applies to EU citizens. That's incorrect. The GDPR does not use the word citizen anywhere. You can search it. You won't find it. It says individuals in the EU. So GDPR applies to the personal information of individuals in the EU. Now, there's lots of discussion on how to interpret that, along with other questions and on how to implement other parts of the regulation. And what we think is, as time goes by, we'll all learn together more specifics about how to address these topics and what specifically is going to be concentrated on for fines and where you should put most of your work efforts. This slide's about IoT and GDPR responsibility. So if we look at IoT, what does it include? So it includes screens, and those are like TVs and monitors, devices like insulin pumps and baby monitors, applications, for instance, the smartphone app to control lights that Udo was talking about, all work together and all connect to the cloud. We have IoT device manufacturers. Those are obviously the ones that make the devices, like the drones and the robots and the smart TVs, the med devices in home appliances. And then we have the IoT service operators. And they take the manufactured devices and use them to provide a service. So an example of that would be in your car, you might have an OnStar system or something similar where you can press a button and get emergency services, but also if you're in a crash, the emergency services will be alerted. Another example is energy companies who take smart devices that are manufactured by somebody else, they package them into a total smart home solution and sell you that. So, you know, there's another example of an IoT service operator. If you have one of the cars, if you have an insurance company that gives you a discount for putting a device, attaching a device to your car that monitors your driving, that's another example. That insurance company is an IoT service operator. So who should do what? Who should care about GDPR? So we often hear manufacturers saying they only sell the product, so they don't have to worry about privacy. And then we have service providers over on the right that are saying, well, the manufacturers should ensure privacy before we buy the product. So who's right? Well, both are responsible. The manufacturers and the operators, they can be across the globe, and it's really essential that they work together to ensure privacy. What we find is that the main players to ensure success are project management, legal, and marketing. So please make sure you have a clear digital strategy across all of them, and you're clear about what vendors and partners are supplying to you. As I mentioned, you need to secure data in order to keep it private. Privacy and security, they aren't a once and done type of thing. They're continual and iterative throughout the life cycle of the product or the service. You continually should test, continually update lists of risk. Privacy and security fit into common areas of IT focus for IoT. So these include the list here. They're not limited to this list, however, but you'll see that GDPR is weaved into design, you know, as you take an idea into development, secure software development, security testing, risk management, incident management, vulnerability management, third-party management, and then you want to make sure that your user documentation is all sufficiently updated to allow for GDPR.
You probably have heard about privacy by design, and frankly spoken, this is one of my favorite slides because this is where companies create the problem. So they start to develop a product, they think about just the functionality, and when the product is ready, then they start about thinking about security and about privacy, and then they begin to repair the process. They begin to repair the hardware, software, or by the end, they don't reach the level they should reach. So what I always recommend is start at the beginning of the product management cycle. Really start at the beginning to think about what does it mean? What do I want to do on privacy? What do I have to do on security? And then we can together demystify really the question, what do I have to do for privacy and security? Because by the end, we will have a situation that clearly have an understanding of the GDPR or other regulations like HIPAA, etc. And then according to these requirements, you have developed a functionality a package. And then you can start to think about your strategy, and then you can really build these solutions from the beginning. But that means you have in your organization to bring sales, product management, marketing, hardware people, software developer together to define what is our strategy. Sally already has taken the word digital strategy. So do you really did you think about which data are you collecting? How do you protect it? And have you thought about security and all of that stuff? And this means privacy by design from the beginning. When you develop your hardware, your software, the apps, then you really have to start it. And then by the end, this will help you, because sometimes product needs 1-2 years to be developed. And if you then have forgotten to put the right thing in place for hardware, for software, then it's really getting a disaster and costs you a lot of money.
As I mentioned, potential fines for not complying with the GDPR are huge. So if you haven't yet started on this journey, and believe me, it's a journey, or you're unsure about your stance, then there's some suggestions on the slide. Please remember that it's important to consult an attorney to ensure you're required to comply and to obtain guidance as you go. So this slide deck shouldn't be taken as all you need to comply with for GDPR. We're just highlighting key concepts. I just want to make sure that's understood here. GDPR includes lots more and many details. We've heard from discussions over the last year and with data protection governing bodies that the first fines will likely be for violations that are brought to their attention. They're very, very busy these days. They have ramped up incredibly. They're hiring a ton of people. So they are not likely to go looking for trouble. They're busy enough. So they'll most likely be following up first on data breaches, and breaches are required to be reported under the GDPR. And they'll also be following up on large numbers of individuals filing complaints against the company. So remember, GDPR makes complaining easier because you have to institute a way for people to get their data, and if you don't, they can complain. So what we suggest, there are a few suggestions here to start, is document the types of data you have, where it resides, and what you're doing with it, who has it. Really important to know where your data is. Accurate documentation is a key for compliance with GDPR, and it will also help you comply with information requests if you have everything documented, if you've done some data mapping so you know when data comes in and where it goes and where it leaves. Breaches must be reported within 72 hours, if at all possible. So they take this very seriously. So I'd attempt to increase logging and monitoring efforts so that you're alerted to potential security and privacy incidents. This may give you enough time to react and remediate gaps prior to a breach. Also, address what may cause customer complaints. So examples of that are, again, the inability to provide customer data to them when they request it, or not being able to erase their data for some reason. So let's go to the specifics of recommendations for IoT devices, IoT services, consent around IoT under the GDPR, and certification.
So here you see now our recommendation for the device. So device means really the hardware piece. This will be the smart TVs, this will be the IP camera, the insert for insulin pumps and all that stuff. So take care that you encrypt the data on the device to the gateway. So in a smart home, for example, you have a wired or a wireless connectivity to the gateway. Make sure that the data is encrypted. Secondly, also use encrypted way from the gateway to the internet as well. Then the remote updates. It is very important that you have an update possibility, because when you have a data breach and you have to have patches, and then you have to have a situation that you can contact this device as well. Reset to resettings is important. Then when you think about storage on a hardware, for example, an IP camera, most of the IP cameras in the market have a DVR, a digital video recorder installed. And then you have to think about, what do I do with that data on that hardware? What do I do, for example, if people want to delete data? How can I delete data on a hardware? And is the data encrypted? Then all about this you have to think about when you are really storing data on hardware. Or number 8 is also important. Think about data which you need. And I just give you an example from Google. Google weeks ago said, we are storing with our voice recognition any data we do not even know what we are going to do with it in the future. So they are storing data now, and they build maybe business cases in the future with that. This is a clear mistake, and this is not GDPR conform. So when you use data, you have to know wherefore you use it, otherwise you can really run into problems. Number 9, when you build devices, for example, you build an air conditioner and you put motion detectors in it, or even other sensors which can smell who's in the room, for example, then this is also collecting data. And make sure when you do this that you explicit explain wherefore you do it and what's the reason and what's the functionality. So when it comes to cloud services, then the situation is even complex, more complex. So here we have recommendation for your processes. We have to, I'm just going to a few examples here because otherwise it's getting too much. You will get this presentation as well. So you have to have an individual password. Sally said it already, but I repeat it. The data breach has to be managed within 72 hours. And think about also medium or small size companies. What does that mean on a Friday evening? Do you really have the processes to manage this? And this can be a problem. Then we have to work with you on the patch and vulnerability management. And there is a very nice paragraph, right to be forgotten. That means as well, right to be forgotten, including your third-party vendors. So third-party can be somebody who has created for you an app. This can be somebody who has delivered to you software, to your hardware. Maybe you have even integrated a CPU with the software stack, and you maybe do even not know what is happening with that data. I worked with a manufacturer of PCs, and they didn't even know what is happening with the fingerprint data, for example. So you really have to think about the complete end-to-end situation to decide what do I have to do to fulfill the right to be forgotten. So you have to make sure that your vendors are also deleting the data, for example. Number 8, it should be possible that the user to control to delete sound and image recordings. And think about this, what does it mean for your organization? So maybe you have sound and images recorded and this can be deleted. Data portability is something which manufacturers are really worrying about. That means when I buy from you a smart home system and I have it installed and I have my personal data, which I like to because I do know which functionality is behind it. So in consent, I'm going to the manufacturer and saying, hey, tomorrow I will buy a smart home system from somebody else. Can you please shift my personal data now to this supplier? So this is a quite unusual process until now. But when you deeply think about it, it makes sense. So this is my favorite picture here, because it is about talking about consent. And what does consent mean? Consent is you really have to explain a consumer or an employee, what are you doing and wherefore are you doing it? For example, are you using data for personalized advertisement? And who is getting that data from you? Or do you want to make predictive maintenance, for example? So you take diagnosis data to a manufacturer for software improvement. Did you ask your customer about that? Do you use the location from the consumer? Do you share data with somebody else? Are you giving personalized data to third parties? And this is for example, very important if you're a cloud service operator and you're having manufacturers from hardware, then you maybe have to give some personal data to manufacturer, but then please explain this to your consumer, to your customer as well. Transmission of speech or image provided, that's not obvious to the user that the transmission is a central function of the device. This, for example, applies for an IP camera. It applies for all smart TV. A lot of people do not know that, that the TV is hearing what you're saying in the last 10, 15 seconds. But this is needed if you want to have a voice control instead of standard remote control, for example. 7, transmission to a third country. This is a very tricky thing because people have not thought about it. If you have, for example, your manufacturer sitting in China, we have to explicitly ask Europeans, do you agree that your data is transferred to China? Do you agree to this? And this is very important because people have not even thought about where is the data going to. Do I have the data in a cloud in Europe? Do I have the data in a cloud in China? And I met customers and manufacturers here in China, for example. They have not even thought about building a cloud service in Europe. They are collecting everything from Europe to China. This is fine, but you have to do it in a consent with the consumer. So that was the reason why we as TÜV Rheinland started to think about how can we now work on the product side and on the cloud service side. And then we said, okay, it is no longer enough that we just check electrical testing and that we check the mobile connectivity. We really have to look into the IoT product and check the hardware, the communication, the apps, the documentation. We are offering penetration tests, and for sure, we have to look what is done with the data. On the IoT service, we have to see how do you build your infrastructure, how do you handle data privacy, is your organization able to be conformed to the GDPR, what are your processes, have you done penetration tests on your servers, and also the documentation, and how do you handle external parties.
Udo and I have been very involved in all facets of privacy and security in bringing products and services to market. And that includes working with medical device manufacturers in all the intricacies in bringing those devices to market under the FDA guidelines. What we see is that there are certain facets of security and privacy, and generally your IoT normal work that you need to think about with IoT devices. So these are critical to the success of building and maintaining a privacy and security program. One of these is secure software development. So as we know, applications are part of IoT. This can include smartphone apps, desktop apps, embedded software and firmware that are actually on the devices. These all need to be developed securely according to secure development lifecycle policies. And there should be coding standards that talk about how you should code securely, specifically how, what libraries you're going to use, what security utilities and so forth. So it's just how you build security into these applications. Very, very important. So all developers should follow standards around secure development. You should also provide, they should be able to prove their understanding. They should be able to go to training every year. This also includes consultants and any contractors you use. They should understand what your methods are around securing software. They should go to training. They should prove their understanding of coding concepts. In addition to that, applications, devices, infrastructure, they should all be regularly tested, and the test should happen at specific points in the IoT lifecycle. So don't just test at the beginning and at the end. That won't work. As you know, these devices and these services that go through lots of iterations, they need to be tested at specific dates. And we suggest putting security gates up to say, okay, you can't go any further with this product until these specific security needs are met, and require proof of that in documentation. The idea is that at these specific points, you want to identify any areas of weaknesses, and that will allow you to close the gaps before a customer finds them, before the device or the service gets out into the public. This slide shows 3 of the backbones for good privacy and security programs. They're definitely not the only 3, but there are 3 that we think are important for IoT. Risk management is huge. So GDPR requires that privacy and security measures are implemented, what they say is appropriate to the risk to an individual's rights and freedoms, meaning that if there was a situation where an individual's rights and freedoms could be hurt, or they would lose those rights and freedoms, then that's a high risk, and you need to take action and appropriately design privacy and security controls to mitigate that risk. So a good risk management program, it documents personal data uses, the risks based on use cases, the company's tolerance for risk. The program should include listings of what your current risks are, their levels of risk, so is something a high risk or a low risk, and then your steps for remediating those risks, your next steps. And it's iterative, so it should be continually updated. This also includes, you want to include risks for third parties as well, because third-party risk is big. There was a study saying that a significant portion of all risk is from third parties. So we'll talk about that in the next slide, but again, it's important to include those risks in a risk management program. Threat models, also a good tool for identifying risk. We suggest joining industry groups. So there are groups that are around your industries that hold meetings, and those meetings are around privacy and security risk, and they regularly discuss late-breaking news on cyber threats, and it can be really helpful. The GDPR also requires regular assessments of risk. So prove that you are considering risk around the personal data that you hold and that you process. So these include data protection impact assessments, and those gauge the risk of adding new systems and new processes. And you want to work with the supervisory authorities that you're dealing with to make sure that you're following, that you're allocating risk to these new systems and processes, and you're protecting them appropriately. Interestingly, or maybe this is actually the case in quite a few instances, is that many of these risk management processes and concepts are required. So especially for medical devices, to get approval for a med device by the FDA, you have to have a risk management program. And once the device actually gets approved, there is post-market work that you need to do to prove that you have an ongoing risk management program, and there are a lot of pieces to that as well. Incident management, so the GDPR requires, as we mentioned, reporting to the supervisory authority within 72 hours, reporting if there was a breach, and reporting to affected users and third parties. So to do this quickly, you want to have a solid process for reporting incidents and a solid incident response plan so that you can react to the incidents and update your process based on what you've learned from those incidents. Vulnerability management. Vulnerabilities are the holes in your product or your service that malicious actors or anyone unintentionally can take advantage of. So these can obviously result in data getting out there into the public world, and actually data could even be changed, and it could cause significant harm. So as mentioned earlier, logging and monitoring is important in this area. Patching, secure patching and updating of systems, very important. Lastly, we have third-party management, and we've already touched on this quite a bit. So you want to make sure that your third parties who you're relying on to provide parts or components to your product or applications to your services, make sure that you're checking them out for their privacy and security. And so have regular third-party assessments of those processes. All data flowing to these vendors, you have to document it along with the reason for allowing them to have that information. And we mentioned about erasure from third parties. Lastly, we have the user documentation. So we want to make sure that that includes your privacy practices, what your data is, what you're doing to it, how you can move it, and how it's used. And document your security measures around keeping your data secure. So please remember these points on these last slides in the discussion, since security and privacy are closely integrated. And that's the end of our presentation. We hope you've learned something new. On screen, you'll see our contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out to either Udo or me, and we'd love to hear from you. We'd now like to open the lines for any questions you might have.
I already got a few questions, and I can jump in here. And I'll take this one. The first one was about, is the GDPR also for small and medium-sized companies relevant? Yes, very clear. It is for all companies relevant. Just think about a small company from today can be a huge startup, and therefore any company size it has to be compliant. Another question, which is a little bit tricky, this is about can I use anonymous data for research? So I can't answer this with yes or no. We really have to look into it. I'll give you an example. If you are a smart home manufacturer and your group of people is just 1 or 2 in an area, then you do exactly know, even you have anonymized the data, who it is. So we have to make sure that when you use the data for research, that it is really that you can't by the end figure out which person is behind it. Another question for the time frame to check products and cloud services. So we see a time frame for 4 to 8 weeks on a product side, and on a cloud service and your organization on 3 to 6 months. Next question. Is TÜV offering the service as well in Japan? So what we are doing is we offer the service around the world. So we are enhancing our laboratories in China. We do that in Japan. We do that in North America, and we do that as well in Germany. So you can get this service from us around the world.
So I think we can just end here then. If we didn't get to your question, we will address it via email shortly. We hope you found this webinar informative and hope you will join us for any upcoming webinars as well. We do a short 6-question survey that will appear on your screen at the end, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback. Also, if you would like a copy of the presentation slides, you can just reach out to me via email and I'll get those to you. Thank you, Udo and Sally, and hopefully everybody has a good rest of your day.